Hey there, before we get started, how well are you communicating with your church members? Church Post allows me to send customized emails to my members at a very affordable price. Church Post is a web-based application, so I don't have to worry about losing my data if the computer crashes. So if you need to upgrade your church communications, make sure you get a hold of the folks over at Church Post. They're easy to work with and they know what they're doing. Also, who's hosting the videos on your website? I used to use YouTube, but I found that the ads and the widgets that came up were just too distracting and their analytics just weren't helpful enough. Then I found Wistia. Their easy-to-use format delivers great-looking videos to my website with just a few clicks. So if your website features videos like mine does, head on over to Wistia.com, sign up for a free trial. And finally, a bit of shameless self-promotion. That's because, I don't know about you, but I, for years and years, looked for pens and refrigerator magnets and mugs for my church, but really didn't have one place to go to do all this. So I partnered with some pros to start the Grow My Church store. So if you need a source for promotional items for your guests or members, the Grow My Church store can help suggest just the right customized item for you to be more welcoming and more hospitable. Just call Mike or Sally. They've been in the business for decades. Now, here's your program. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Yaw, and welcome to Grow My Church. This is a place where people who are passionate about the local church come to hear from experienced mentors. And today, I'm very excited because we're joined by kind of a pioneer visionary in the United Methodist tradition. He's a large church pastor who started from scratch just a couple of years ago and enjoys a thriving congregation in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm talking with Brad Kalanainen, the founding pastor of Cornerstone United Methodist, which every weekend draws more than 2,000 people for weekend services. Now, Brad is a church planter at heart. He's seen Cornerstone grow at least 10% every year for the past 20 years. So, Brad, let's start right there. Could you give me the stats? How did Cornerstone begin? How has it kept growing? How has the Holy Spirit moved through you in the ministry of this fine congregation?
Cornerstone was an intentional church start from the United Methodist Church in a side of Grand Rapids that was anticipated about 20,000 in growth in the 90s, and I'm not sure we've achieved that because of the recession, although the recession came a little bit later than the 90s. But when I started Cornerstone, I started at a local Christian high school, and when we built our first building 7 years after that, we were alone in the middle of a bean field, and in the 12 years that we were on that location, totally developed housing all around us, as well as a Target mall complex, and so development did happen, and there's people, and it's great to plant a church in a populated area. So
Right. But not all churches, I would say, is it just a matter of anybody opening up the doors and people flow in? I'm sure it's more than just that.
Yeah, it's a lot more. And Grand Rapids is it's the home of the Dutch Reformed community. Mm-hmm. So there's a great heritage of church here, and there's a propensity of Christian Reformed and Reformed Church of America churches on every corner. People are amazed when they come to Grand Rapids. So there are a lot of options for church. We have some giant churches, like Mars Hill is about eight miles away. Calvary, Ada Bible, these are really mega churches. Kentwood Community Church is less than a mile away. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of options for people if they want to go to church. I think from the very beginning we've been very aggressive about people in this area. What I find is a lot of people that have grown up with some church, and many turned off, burnout. There's a lot of dropouts from the Reformed Church and from the Catholic Church, actually. And while we'd like to say our target is totally unchurched people, the truth is, in this area, we're going to find people who haven't been, churched for a long time, but are maybe coming back to something that they didn't expect to be relevant. So,
so your growth, what you're describing to me, has certainly come because you're planning in a geographically strategic area. But also because perhaps you're offering something a little bit different than the Reformed tradition, than some of the other churches that are near you, the other options, if you will. Tell me a little bit about what somebody experiences when they come into your church, and what your intentional differentiations have been.
I think some of the other really giant churches are Bible churches. They intentionally almost assume you know the Bible when you get there. And, they might do a 15-week series on Jesus, or a 17 weeks on the life of David, or that sort of thing. And we intentionally go after seekers a lot more than that. I think we have a very, I'll just say a word about our hospitality.
Okay.
Our hospitality starts, for us, it starts long before a person comes to church. We take seriously Luke 14, where Jesus says, go out and compel them to come in. And so people are aggressive about invitation, and that's probably something I said for the first 15 years, is who are you going to invite next week? And it has really become part of the culture of our church. And I think it's not. I share that around the country, and I find people often don't even think about inviting people. I guess I learned early on that the power of a personal invitation, some of the stats we use is that there's about an 87% chance that a person will stay if they come on somebody's elbow. There's about an 87% chance they won't stay if they come knowing no one. So it's powerful. I started Cornerstone with a telemarketing program, which was which had just come out, I think, by the Brethren Church, maybe in the 1990s. It was pre-telemarketing and pre-caller ID, and but I think that what I did was gathered a lot of volunteers from other Methodist churches. A lot of really elderly people helped me. It was really funny.
And telemarketing, so you just put these folk together and they just called their neighbors.
I put together a phone bank of about 20 phones. Got volunteers for 10 days. We called 11,000 homes. And just with a simple message, are you part of a church family? If they said yes, we just said, God bless you. If they said no, we said, would you like to hear about a new church in your area, and coming to the area? And that was so interesting to me, because the telemarketing people said 10% of the people will respond positively. So out of those 11,000 phone calls, about 900 households said yes, they were interested. So it was almost 10%.
Wow.
And they said 1% would show up, and we got about 120 people immediately. So from day one, I never had less than 120 to 150 people.
If you were going to do that again today, what would you change?
Well, it's much more difficult. People don't answer their phones.
Right.
And I'm not sure the method works. It was terrific in 1990.
Right.
And out of those 900, we sent them 5 invitations, one a week for 5 weeks. So it kept coming at them. And but what I did learn from that, I think probably the lasting lesson, is the power of invitation.
Okay.
My longest staff person here, her name is Sandy. She came on a cold call on the 3rd week, based on that one of those 11,000 phone calls. And I thought, if a person's going to come to a church on a cold call, just think of the power if you humanly invite somebody you know. And that is just, so that has become part of our DNA, that compel them to come in. And then really being aggressively friendly, but not overbearing.
How much did you talk about your denominational moniker? Was that at all a part of it?
We didn't that much. In the 1990s, I think the trend was more to play down the denomination, play up this is a place that will meet the needs of you and your family. And we've actually added some things about the denomination back into our website that were not there previously. we have never been embarrassed by it or tried to deny it, and we've been fully supportive of all of the conference functions, but we just have never flown it as our major flag, and we've never put the symbol on the side of our building, much to the chagrin of some of the Methodists that visit here. But,
well, okay, so you started 20 years ago. You got these 120 people there, and yet you continue to have grown, at least 10% a year since then. Unpack that for me, if you will.
I think it's a multi-point thing. One is just hospitality to the max when people are there, trying to think of their needs first.
And explain that for me.
Yeah.
Because that's so difficult. As you and I talked before the interview, Brad, that 4 out of 5 churches in America are not growing, and a big part of that, I think we both know, is that we tend to be insular as groups, and breaking through that to remember that we are here as missional communities can be really difficult. And I would expect in your years there, you've probably seen that same temptation, if you will.
I think publicly I say, and have for 20 years, and this isn't necessarily an accurate percentage, but I like to say it publicly, 50% of our energy is spent on people who are not here yet. And then I say, in order to protect the flock, 50% of our energy are spent on us. And I challenge our church, and I challenge churches all over the country, actually. I get to speak a lot, to look at their church budgets and just ask the question, how much do you really spend on people not here yet? And it's very, the church budget's very telling, because most of it's on our staff, our curriculum, our utilities, our.
Yeah. But then it's also, I'm thinking about, say, staff salaries are usually the highest aspect of a church's budget. So I think about my salary and your salary, because I'm a pastor as well. But a portion of my time is spent on the people who aren't here yet, etc. And do you take that into account, or how does that work?
Yes. And we've encouraged our staff to do that as well. And we've always invested a lot in marketing, because marketing is money spent on people not here yet. And that's usually the first thing that gets cut on a tight budget of the church.
And tell me, let's go into that for just a second. You mentioned so many important things, Brad, and things that you probably just take naturally and think it's no big deal. But I think a lot of us are very interested, because church marketing, is a delicate area, because you could give to missions, you could do a lot of things, but to buy a bus bench or something like that seems to be a bit anti-gospel. So tell me how you walk through that theologically and practically. What works for you?
Well, that's a great question, because even Rob Bell, who's right down the road, has spoken against marketing of any kind.
And he's the mega church pastor at Mars Hill, is it, that's down the street from
Yeah,
and
he resigned yesterday, but and he's a great person. He has just been not supportive of any kind of marketing. But I have found that when you get, I feel a little bit like the Book of Romans. If you don't get an audience, if you're not heard, the gospel has to be heard. And so I say to church pastors, you got to get an audience. Otherwise, you can have the best preaching in the world and nobody knows.
Right.
So we've used in the marketing area, we've used large postcards a lot for blanket marketing.
So it's kind of direct mail, as they say?
Direct mail, especially in the early years. We've done that intentionally around maybe 6 big Sundays a year. One year we did a test of 6 large Sundays, which we tried to really invite thousands of people. We did some measurement, found at the end of the year, 46% of our visitor flow came on one of those 6 Sundays. And so then you step back and analyze that and say, was it worth it? Is it worth it to do something special to invite the community constantly? With direct mail, no one invitation usually springs a person loose to come, but let me just tell you a quick story. A woman showed up at a Friday Bible study here for women, and I just happened to pop in that day, and I said, I don't think I know you. And she said, well, you've been inviting me for 6 years. And I said, well, you got to tell me what that's about, because I have no idea. She said, I've been getting these postcards in the mail, and I'm at a point in my life where I really wanted God that's what I thought to turn to was your church, and I thought that's the point of direct mail. So you have to invest over the long haul.
Mm-hmm. And so you send these out, say 6 times a year, every year?
Yeah, we did that for a long time. We do it less now.
Mm-hmm. What do you do now?
We've used some other methods. We had the local TV station come in, put together an advertisement for us, a 30-second ad. We ran that all around Christmas and Easter. Mm-hmm. And then the last couple of years, we've taken out billboards around the city. Mm-hmm. And a quick little story there, we put up a billboard. Well, 2 of them come to mind. One was a generic one. It was a giant pair of well-used leather sandals. Mm-hmm. And when you're driving down the road, you see these giant sandals, and the tagline said, Cornerstone Church, come casual, Jesus did. Mm-hmm. And so it was just a message that you don't have to dress up to come here. Mm-hmm. And that's one of our generic ones. But we will often put the next message series out there ahead of time. And not long ago, we did a series called, well, it was 3 years ago when HD TV first came out, and we did a Jesus in HD kind of series. And I stopped at a local dry cleaner and got talking to this Chinese kid that was working the dry cleaning, and we just got chatting, and it came up that I was a pastor. He said, "What church?" And I said, "Cornerstone." He said, "Jesus in HD." He goes, "That was the coolest thing. I want to visit that church." And I thought, bingo, there's a 20-year-old, who's paying attention to what he's seeing. So we've had a lot of traffic from billboards, but obviously the best traffic is from it really talking to your people constantly about inviting those unchurched folks in their circles, because they're people I will never see and never touch. And so that kind of spirit really is contagious. And but I think, you have to have something that they're proud to invite to. Right. Because, so many people don't want to invite their friends to church because they're embarrassed, or, the quality's bad, or it's old-fashioned, or it hasn't kept up with relevancy, or, whatever the reason. But
I hear this from a number of people who sit in chairs similar to yours, Brad, that getting them in, of course, and having a very seeker-friendly service and being able to reach out to people who don't have much of a church background becomes the difficult part comes when trying to get into the catechesis of the church, when trying to bring people to a deeper knowledge of Jesus. How do you handle that challenge?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, we say this a lot. We don't dumb down weekend worship. Mm-hmm. And I know some seeker approaches have been that way, and we try not to do that. We want it to be challenging to deeper Christians as well. We just try to say it in a way that people understand it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so you can make the gospel accessible with language and dress and visuals and that sort of thing, without making it overly simplistic. So, but we do recognize the need for deeper discipleship. So we do 2 things here, probably. Our biggest focus is on what we call life groups, the small group movement. We have 80 to 100 life groups. A really clear vision for that, and a lot of that thanks to our current director, Bonnie Anderson. And I actually get to travel around the country speaking on life groups a lot. I've kind of hit that little niche in the Methodist Church.
Because that can be really difficult. I imagine you have to have a critical mass for something like that to work out, Brad.
You really don't.
Okay, tell me about that.
Yeah, if you're in a church of 50, you can start 1. Because Christians are going to grow deeper when they're talking about their faith.
How do you organize them? How do you, your curriculum, practically, what do they look like?
Practically, some DNA is that, there are, aberrations like small men's groups and that sort of thing, 4 and 5 people, but most of the time they are, Jesus had it right, around 12 people, 10 to 14, somewhere in there. We encourage them to meet in homes or apartments. not not in sterile church rooms. Although we don't have a lot of sterile church rooms here. We have a new building, so we encourage them to meet weekly.
Okay.
Not every other week. We started every other week years ago, and it's really hard to change that DNA once you get started. But
Okay.
we have a trimester system where we encourage groups to meet for 12 weeks and then take a month off. So we build 3 months a year off: December, April, August.
Okay.
So there's a natural break time. And out of those 12 weeks, we really want our groups to take about 3 of those times to do mission work in the community.
Okay.
So mission is a big focus of our life groups. And study and prayer. We do have a curriculum that we begin all new groups with. And it teaches them spiritual disciplines. It helps them discover their spiritual gifts. And that's the first 12 weeks. And after that, they can choose from a variety of approved resources.
Okay. Tell me a little bit. Well, I mean, that. How do you get people to give up? I mean, I'm imagining once a week, probably an hour or two. What time of day do they meet? What about young families? I mean, I think of all the roadblocks that I hear of as a pastor when we invite people to get more involved.
Yeah, and we have the same struggles. It's not like everybody's compliant to that vision. I'd say about 50% of our church are involved right now.
Wow.
We did have 60 to 65%, but we've just built a new building. We've been here 2 years, and we've added about 800 to 1,000 new people, so we're catching up.
Right.
We have an event 3 times a year called Life Link, because we use the word life group. And that Life Link is in the fall, in the winter, and right before summer. And those are nights that you sign up for. You actually have to pay to come. You pay for the first curriculum. We find it's only $9, but when people pay, they show up, even if it's a small amount. And at that LifeLink event, when they come, they get matched with people.
And are these geographical matches? Are they affinity matches? How do you go about matching?
It's all over the board.
Okay.
Small group ministry is messy. It's not black and white. I usually say try to match people in 6 or 7 different ways. Common culture, common crisis, common communities where they live. I've got 6 or 7 C words, but I can't remember them all right now. But there's different ways to match. We find most people are asking for groups around age.
Okay.
That's the most common one. Is, do you have anything in the 20s, anything in the 30s, anything with small children, anything with teenagers? But Chris, let me just divert to a different thing.
Sure.
Oh, by the way, the second thing that we do for discipleship is in the fall we have a teaching series on Wednesday nights that's an in-depth, large group Bible study teaching on the book of Mark. On Wednesday nights, it's about a 90-minute thing. There's 110 people in that. So that's an option if you want to go deeper. Here it is. So we do it every 15 weeks in the fall, and then in the spring on Wednesday nights we offer classes.
Okay.
Just random classes.
Okay, but you were going to move into something else, you said?
I wanted to share with you that probably one of the biggest reasons for our growth in these last years has been a pretty dynamic corner kids ministry. Kids ministry is huge here. And then our student ministry is very large, and those are very compelling for this community that has a lot of families. We have middle school worship through the same time as all of our big church worship. So that's very compelling to middle school families.
So the kids actually go into their own worship service and their parents
Yep.
go to another one.
Yep.
Okay.
And it's really aimed at them. The director is terrific. And so we're pulling about 130 to 140 middle schoolers. I think we have 60 enrolled in confirmation. Those are just 8th graders this year. And then senior high, we do a Sunday evening worship and small groups. So and middle school small groups on Wednesday nights. So we have that small group mentality all the way down to kindergarten. Even our little children have big group worship and then small groups.
And that brings up an important question, I think, Brad, which is you obviously are not leading every small group. You've got to come up with a way to train effectively, identify, train, and keep educated your small group leaders. That's got to be a huge deal. How do you approach that?
Well, I don't anymore, but that's only because of our size, you know. But I speak with churches all the time that have very little staff, or just a pastor, or maybe one staff person, and everything can start small. It can start with volunteers. I started with all volunteers. We had small group coordinators that were just volunteer led for a long time. But now I'm able to step back and turn it over to some people who can do the trainings. So we do quarterly trainings for small group leaders. We ask them to come quarterly. And probably, let me just share with folks, there are 3 quick things that stop churches from growing.
Okay.
There's a bunch of them, obviously, but 3 major ones. One is space. If you don't have space for people, you got to figure it out. And that's, that could be kid space, worship space, parking space. There's a lot of churches struggle with parking. And they're going to stymie their growth. Another one is service times. I find that churches are always, most of the time, think about themselves. We like 10 o'clock, or we like, this or that. They don't think about the outsider again. Is there any energy spent on people? What's the best time?
And let's stay there for just a second before we go on to the third. How do you gauge that? How do you know what the people who aren't there, what their better time is?
Well, I'm sure there are more sophisticated methods. For me, I make decisions faster than huge amounts of study, because sometimes. But we use, we've used demographic studies for years. Currently, our denomination is using Mission Insight, which is a demographic study company. We have a contract with them, but they can tell you who's in the area. And if you're in an area with a high percentage of university students or younger families, or you kind of just know that maybe for students later's going to be better. So
So what times do you offer, and what times have you felt have been helpful in your context?
Well, honestly, I think it's hard to ever beat 9:30 and 11. Those are like magic hours. We have 9:30 and 11:15 just because we needed 45 minutes to turn over the parking lot. And then we've added Saturday night.
Okay, what time Saturday night?
We've been using 6 o'clock.
Okay.
But interesting enough, for the summer, because we live again, you have to know your mission field.
You got to know the context.
You got to know the context, and we're in a recreational state. A lot of lakes. Lake Michigan, less than an hour away. It's like being near the ocean. A lot of cottages. So for the summer, we switched Saturday over to Monday. We just pushed it between the holidays, Labor and Memorial Day.
And how did that work?
Fantastic.
Really?
We kept the same average attendance. Didn't lose people.
And I imagine in years past you probably did lose people when it came to
we'd lose 200 or 300 a summer.
Wow.
And we heard comments all summer. This was brilliant. Thank you because they want to go to church. They want to stay up with the series, whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
They don't want to miss, but they also got cottages, and they're not.
Sure. I heard this statistic. I don't know if it's true or not, Brad. That of all 50 states, Michigan holds holds the record, or ranks top in the percentage of people who choose to vacation in their own state.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've heard that. I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, it's certainly played out here a lot. So a lot of camping and a lot of cottage goers.
So first you said space, then you said service times. What's the third?
The third one is, if a church is going to grow, the leadership, be they staff or volunteers, have to, if they're going to grow past, now up through about 600 to 800, you can get away with this. But if you're going to get to 1,000, or let's say, they have to decide that they're not going to do 95% of the ministry anymore. That they have to do 5% and raise up leaders under them. In other words, they have to become trainers of leaders. I had a consultant in here about 6 or 7 years ago. He's a good friend of mine. He came up and spent an afternoon. Actually, that day was the most profitable day. I think we paid him $850 to come. He spent 3 hours with my staff, and he challenged them to stop doing the ministry that they were hired for, and to start developing leaders who did the ministry, and they managed the leaders. And I guarantee you, Chris, that was a turning point in the life of our church.
No kidding.
It changed the culture. The youth ministry went from a couple of struggling volunteers to, the senior high probably has 40 adults in it now. The junior high probably has 35 or 40.
And it was just convincing your folk who were the struggling volunteers to be trainers rather than sole resource people.
Yeah, they were staff at that point. Not all of them were full-time. Some of them were part-time, but now they've become leaders of leaders. And that's a fundamental shift in thinking. And actually, one of our staff couldn't make that switch, and she's no longer with us, partly because of that. So that's huge. And so we try to think bigger now. Think about managing leaders rather than, because a lot of your staff people are hired because they are a great kid magnet, or they are a wonderful youth worker, and if they're still trying to carry all the balls and balance all the plates, you're limited. And pastors do the same thing. You're trying to do all the pastoral care and try to run all the meetings, and I just gave that up a long time ago.
And that's a fascinating point, because Brad, when you went to seminary, when I went to seminary, the vast majority of our churches are, shall we say, pastoral size, are a manageable size for one pastor to know all the families, to be able to go down to the hospital to see them, to be able to interact on that level. But you've had to actually evolve into somebody who's more like, I hate using business analogies, but you're more like kind of a CEO or somebody that's managing people. How have you kept up with that? Has that been a struggle for you to let go of that stuff?
I think that's the secret to my 20 years, actually. It's hard to go from church planner to letting other people.
Right, yeah, when you look at everything.
Yeah, church planners are dominant people. They like to run everything. And honestly, that's why we started the whole small group movement. We really started small groups at about 200 people, and I like to say I noticed the culture of our church got very grumpy, and I couldn't figure it out. It just seemed like everything was going well, but people were in bad moods about everything. It was a lot of anger and conflict, and I couldn't understand it. I almost had to step back and look at the big picture, and I realized we were headed for a time when we didn't know everybody's name. That was a fundamental, and I realized a lot of our United Methodist churches, I don't know about the Episcopal, but they never get beyond the fact that we have to know everybody's name. And once they started identifying that and saying it publicly, that's a great thing. It's not our highest virtue.
Right.
The business we're in is to bring people to the kingdom of God, not to know everybody's name.
Right.
So we started small groups, and honestly, that taught me also that the ministry of care in the church really belongs to the people, not the pastor. And that's how our seminaries and churches have gotten that confused.
That's a big statement. The ministry of care belongs to the people and not to the clergy.
I mean, isn't that right out of Ephesians, where the writer says we're supposed to equip people for the work of the ministry. So why should I be the only one who gets that privilege of being with somebody in a crisis and praying with them? And so,
well, very often people who are in that crisis don't feel they're being tended to properly unless the pastor shows up. That's always a pushback, isn't it?
And that is a problem with pastors that go into traditional settings where that's been the case, and people have been trained to expect the pastor. But you can change that over time. You have to preach that change. That's a vision casting change.
Do United Methodists follow a lectionary, Brad?
Many do.
Many do. And what do you do? You mentioned sermon series. How do you go about identifying that, and how do you choose?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have never used the lectionary. So we use a couple of methods to balance out the year.
Yeah.
And now we plan about a year in advance. We plan out the identity of our series, and we use a method of we rotate through 5 kinds of series.
Okay.
One I would call a fishing expedition. And those are very high-profile, need-based series that speak to a whole lot of people. And we try to use those in our times right after the biggest attendance. So we would use fishing expeditions in January, which come after Christmas Eve, visitor flow. We would use them after Easter, back in the fall, those sorts of times.
And what do those look like? What is a fishing expedition? Unpack that, if you will.
Yeah, I'm really fishing for new people at those times, and so I want to do something that we can advertise. That's, I'm thinking of one we did in the fall a few years ago called "Moms, Dads, and Other Endangered Species." That's parenting, and that's all that it was. But in a community with a lot of families, people see that and say, I got to get there. I want to know more about that.
Right.
That's what I hope to create. So, and then a second kind is a discipleship series. So we're going to mix in. We're not going to do all fishing, felt need things. We're going to do a discipleship series. We have one coming up next year called Daily Dose, which is really a spiritual discipline series. What's a daily dose of God? What's your prayer life like? What's the importance of the Bible? We'll probably touch on some other spiritual disciplines like fasting and worship and things like that. A third kind is pastoral care. I think you have to mix in some pastoral care series. You might do a series. I remember doing one called 3D, and we did divorce, depression, and something else. I can't remember. But it's that thing where you can do pastoral care from the front. It just saves hours of counseling and other kinds of things too. You can do that on a broader scale. Breaking free of habits, breaking free of addictions, that sort of thing. Then we're going to do church equipping series, personal equipping series. So we're going to do some on motivating people to get involved in service, to get out into the mission field, to get out into the community. Don't just be a pew sitter. Those equipping kinds of motivational, do something kind of series. And then the last one is just vision casting. Your people have to know where the church is going. And we just celebrated 20 years this past year, and so we did a series called Celebrate 20. And I've really tried to lay down a vision for the next 20. So just push it out there. Here's where we need to go, kind of thing. So,
and tell me about that, because after 20 years, when you get a church your size, Brad, you've got a feel of the cult of personality thing. That you're the founder, you're the guy who used to do everything, and now you've seen it grow. How do you go about raising up the next generation and making sure that the community, that's been formed, is tended to?
Yeah, 2 ways. Intentionally, 5 years ago, I brought in an associate pastor. It's the first time I've had an ordained associate. The church was 15 years old and about 1,200, 1,300 people.
Is that right? And that's the first time you brought in an ordained assistant?
Yeah. We've tended to raise up our own staff and have really excellent lay people that have become various kinds of specialists. but I'd made friends with a guy that was 20 years younger than me, and we really see eye to eye on a lot of things, and that's pretty crucial. So bringing Ken into the picture, for the first 2 years, intentionally, we teamed every sermon, almost every sermon for 2 years. I wanted to help him.
What do you mean teamed? You both spoke?
We preached in the same
Slot.
30 minutes, yeah. We would trade points, walk on and off, sometimes sit together. And the point of that was I wanted Ken to be accepted not as the junior associate, but as a full pastor. So on my part, I gave away some power at that point and influence. And Ken's a very likable person, and so I think he's thought of as I'm one of the other pastors. I'm one of the pastors, and that's how we talk about each other. So I think the senior pastor has to decide to do that. So if I leave tomorrow, Ken is firmly established here. So the transition's done basically, and we can do that with another one, probably somebody else, because we're looking at launching satellites now, and so we'll probably be looking at other people. But
let's see. I want to get back to something that you mentioned that you're aware of the dumbing down that can go on in churches like yours, and I'm sure aware of you've got a big front door, but you also have to have some sort of a back door as well of people who are disenfranchised for whatever reason. How do you keep from lowering the bar and keep people challenged?
You got to work at that all the time. I think we use our worship service pretty effectively. We have a saying that's a double negative: never preach for nothing. Strong believer that every message should compel people to do something. There should be a verb attached to it, practically. And so we challenge people to respond every week in some way. Sometimes it's just through a prayer. Sometimes it's through a movement. We use a lot of movement in our church, even with 2,000 people. It might be, in fact, a few weeks ago, our middle school guy was preaching on bitterness, and he ended the message. We put a spotlight we have a large cross that sits on stage. It's a stainless steel cross that was made by an artist, and we put a spotlight behind it so it cast a shadow out into the worship center. And he just invited people, if they had some bitterness that they had to get rid of, to pass by the shadow of the cross. It was as simple as getting up out of your seat and walking through the shadow. And I saw people in tears and, struggling with those deep feelings of unforgiveness. As simple as that, but we call for responses. And I think that's important. It helps transform people. It's not, so many preachers preach and they'll say, "So be it" at the end. And I want to say, "So what?" You've wasted whatever time you put into it, and you wasted their time if it was just an intellectual exercise or just an emotional exercise, either one. I think when you preach, one of the things I teach is that you have to hit the head. You have to hit 4 parts of the body every sermon. The head is that intellectual piece. You have to teach people something new. They have to go, "Oh, I've never seen that before," or it might be some cultural thing Jesus did or whatever, some Greek word. Then second, you have to hit the heart. You got to engage their emotions. You have to make them feel deeply. It might be laughing, it might be crying, it might be comforting. It's hard to tell. You have to hit their hands. They have to respond in some way. So we use a lot of hands responses, give people a rock when they walk in and preach on forgiveness and encourage them to come forward and drop their rock. That was John chapter 8. Whatever. One day I preached a sermon on bearing each other's burdens from Galatians, and we passed out a paper plate to everybody, one of those real cheesy kind that you can't eat on. And, right at the end, encourage people to write down one thing, if God was right here, that they would want God to do for them. Don't put their name on it. So people wrote on their paper plates, and right at the end of the service, I invited them to all throw them high and far in the air. So it was chaotic and funny.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, just pick up a plate, and that's your prayer for the next 7 days. You're going to bear each other's burdens. Don't get your own back. But
Right.
I mean, just simple things and people relate to those visual, tactile things, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So head, heart, and hands, and then I also have added into that list the belly, because I think preachers underestimate the value of humor.
Okay.
I think you got to make people laugh out loud. In fact, I like to say, what's the laugh out loud moment in this service? We want to make sure we build that in, because especially when you're dealing with men are hard to get a hold of, and if they laugh, they drop their defenses. If you can get them to laugh, and that might be through jokes or videos, or there's lots of different methods. Not everybody's a joke teller or a storyteller, but
right.
Make them laugh, and so that just lowers defense, and
right.
It opens up the door to the gospel, I think. So.
Sure. Well, Brad, we've touched on so many, I think, fascinating aspects of what you do and what the Lord has been doing at your congregation. And I wonder, our audience today is church leaders, pastors, that kind of thing, people looking who are passionate about building healthy congregations. Is there something that you'd like to tell us, or maybe something I asked about that you wanted to tell more about that you'd like to share with us?
I think the secret to growth has a lot to do with shoring up all those different systems in the church. It's not just one answer. It's hospitality, it's your discipleship small group system, it's your kids ministry, it's your student ministry, it's compelling worship services, it's your music. You have to always be asking the question, what's my mission field and how do I reach it? Not what do I want and what comforts us and what do I want to hear? Because church people will always go back to, they'll always turn inward. They will always turn inward, and the leader of the group has always got to be pursuing the 99 and 1 principle. It's the one out there. It's the 99. We'll always look at how can we take better care of ourselves, and I want to hear more hymns, and I want to hear this, and I want a verse by verse study, or and I keep saying that's great, but what about the one? So I think that's been our compelling conviction.
And you reminded me of a point that I wanted to bring up earlier, and that is the importance of spirituality, and certainly your personal walk as a pastor. Could you talk a little bit about that, the importance of it?
That's where I was going with the second part of that is all your systems, and then, but bottom line is the Holy Spirit has to be in it. I think for us, we have put a big focus on prayer in this church. We've identified a room that's close to what we call the hub that everybody can see. It's a prayer room. It's resources of prayer. We have developed a prayer team of people who really have a gift of prayer. They walk through the building. They pray over it weekly. They're available after the services to pray with people. We call the church to a time of fasting every January. We've been practicing something called the Daniel fast from the book of Daniel, a 3-week fast in January to start the year out. So I just think, the Holy Spirit has to be in it. I think the leadership has to be attentive to the Spirit of God in their own private lives. So, we encourage that a lot. So that's, there's an X factor. It's just the God factor, that you can have all the perfect things and God's not in it. So that's the most important factor.
How do you personally, as a pastor, Brad, approach your own spiritual life? What are some of the practical disciplines that you've found nourishing? What might you commend to us? I've read more than once that the single most important thing a person can do to grow their church is for the pastor to become more spiritual.
Yeah, I think just consistency in your spiritual life, just daily, or 5 times a week at least. Let's be honest about that. There's some days you just can't. It's just being in the Word, being in prayer. I find it very effective to keep journals of prayer requests, and so I just keep lists of things I pray for, and then I go back through. I'm always amazed at how many things have been answered. That discipline of fasting. Before we challenged the church to do the Daniel fast, my wife and I actually did it by ourselves when we first read about it 3 years ago. A very interesting thing happened coming out of that. We got to day 20. It's 21 day. And Daniel fast is a natural food fast. So you're not starving. You're just eating really healthy. No sugar, no preservatives, no meat, no dairy, no coffee. We got to day 20, and we've been praying. I usually challenge people to pray about 5 or 6 things that are really important things through that time. And I said to my wife, Colleen, who's just a wonderful person, hey, tomorrow it's over, ice cream. She said, I've been reading so much more about fasting. It's usually 40 days, not 21. Even though Daniel is the only place in the Bible that's 21. And she said, I've been praying for this friend of mine who's really in poverty. Since her divorce, she can't get a job. She doesn't have a college education. And I was thinking to myself, we were trying to move the church to this new location. We needed to sell the old building. We needed over $2 million, part of our financing from the old site. And it had been on the market 24 months, no buyers, no offers. And so reluctantly, I listened to my wife and said, okay, let's go to 40. So we continued with the fast until 40. And we finished on a Thursday. On Friday afternoon, day 41, at 12:30, we were shopping in the mall, and I got a phone call. Hey, we got an offer on the church, and it's a good one. At 2:30 in the afternoon, our friend called. You're not going to believe this. My resume got mistakenly put on some supervisor's desk. I had applied for a half-time secretary job, and I'm now a supervisor of 150,000 substitute teachers all over Michigan. He interviewed me and said, I don't care if you don't have a degree. I want. All that happened on day 41, and when I shared that with our church, I said, that's not because of our great prayers.
Right.
It's because God knew I was going to go through a $12 million building project in 2007 in the heart of the recession. And he knew that this preacher needed some faith. So I think God, just for fun, did it on day 41. So.
Oh gosh, Brad, what a wonderful story to leave us off with. Brad Kalanainen, thank you so much for joining us on Grow My Church.
Chris, thanks very much. Appreciate the offer. Thank you.